Hi, Steve Marchand here. Happy 4th of July if you're listening on the day we release this. A couple of quick notes. First, I've got a great interview today that is a recording of a Substack Live program that was done on Thursday, July 3rd, with congressional candidate here in the 1st District of New Hampshire, Carleigh Beriont. It was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. We touched on a wide range of topics, including healthcare, the practical ramifications of the big, not beautiful bill that's going to get signed into law on July 4th, Carleigh's background, the contours of the congressional race, and much more. Unfortunately, the first couple of minutes of it were cut off because of some quirk with the Substack Live programming. And so you'll miss the very beginning of the discussion, which was mainly about what she will be doing on her first 4th of July as a congressional candidate. Specifically, that she'll be spending the morning in Portsmouth at historic Strawberry Bank, attending a naturalization ceremony for dozens of new Americans from around the world who will be getting naturalized today. I've had the honor of being able to do that as a mayor of Portsmouth many years ago, and also to watch my parents become naturalized citizens. They are natives of Quebec who became naturalized about 20 years ago. One of the most emotional and inspiring events that I've ever attended, and it is beautiful. And at this time, when so many Americans, including most Democrats, are so concerned about the direction of the country, the ramifications of this big sprawling law that goes into effect today, and so much more, it is easy to withdraw or to simply act out in anger. And I understand all that. But what I would say on this 4th of July, if you've never been to a naturalization ceremony, I would urge you to do so. It will give you renewed appreciation that we've had the privilege to be born in this country, if indeed you were, like I was, because you'll see how hard so many people have worked, often from such difficult circumstances, to get the opportunity to achieve what we are so lucky to have been born with, citizenship in the greatest country in the world. I'm glad Carleigh is going to be there today. I hope you can do that at some point. But let's not forget that no matter how difficult times are for you or for others, that we don't forget how great this country has been, how great it is, and how much greater still it can be. And perhaps the best way to do that is to look at it through the eyes of those who are becoming our newest citizens of the country, even on a day like the 4th of July. So we talked a little bit about that before the recording kicked in. That'll give you some context. I hope you'll enjoy the interview with Carleigh. Thanks again for listening, and enjoy both the holiday and today's podcast. So talk a little bit about the process that led you to decide to do something like this, and what looks to be a very wide open primary in a really important congressional race.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this because it's a nice transition from the out of many one moment of the naturalization ceremony to the New Hampshire congressional primary. So, I've been thinking a lot about like where and when my first memory of politics was and what that was like. And I honestly think this morning I woke up and I was like, oh, you know what? It's 1998, and it's the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal. And I say that because I'm 36 years old, so I was in 4th grade at the time, and this is when you learn about the United States. You watch your Schoolhouse Rock, like how a bill becomes a law. You learn that, George Washington didn't cut down the cherry tree. You learn later that that's not a true story. But in 4th grade, you're like, yeah, the president, like, this is the great person who, like, represents the best of us. And I just remember, like, this scandal, and I was too young to really understand what was going on there. But I just remember people being really disappointed and a lot of like, hush, hush, like what's going to happen. And then that, kind of led into the 2000 election with Bush versus Gore and not really knowing what was going to happen there and remembering Florida and like these hanging chads were really important. And at that point, I was in 7th grade. And, later on, right, that same year, we had September 11th happen. And that was a real turning point for me. Thinking back to what you were saying about the naturalization ceremony, where I grew up, a lot of friends lost their parents in September 11th. And I just remember in the days after, like my parents calling their friends and asking if they knew anyone at any hospital who could help them find um, like their husbands or their dads. And a lot of those husbands and dads just were never found. And I remember getting together on the soccer field where we used to play rec soccer and holding like little candles and having this candlelight vigil and feeling like it was really special that like we could all agree that this was a sad thing that happened. Um, and I remember like wanting to understand more about what was happening after that because as a kid, you see the United States going into war and like your reference point is like World War II because I don't think we talked a lot about the Vietnam War in school growing up. And so it was like, all right, there's this war happening, I assume that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. Um and I got to college and I realized, it was a lot more complicated than that. And I studied religion and I studied international politics in order to get a better sense for the world around me and to make sense of my place in it. And, I graduated and it was in the middle of the financial crisis and I couldn't get a job. And I left the country and I went to the Republic of the Marshall Islands and I worked as a teacher there. People were like, well, you got the degree, like you studied Arabic, like why are you going to the Marshall Islands? That's the Pacific. It's totally different. And I'm really glad that I did because, that introduced me to a whole other part of US history. And that's the history of US nuclear testing. And I learned a lot about the legacies of that and the post, and Cold War period in the United States. And I came back to the United States in 2013. And I had missed a whole lot in the 3 years that I was gone. I had missed the Occupy Wall Street movement. I had missed the Tea Party. I missed most of Obama's second term. And I went to graduate school in order to study this history of US nuclear testing and involvement in the world. And I got to graduate school and Donald Trump got elected. And I just remember sitting in a classroom the day after he had been elected and my teachers looking at us and saying, we don't know what happened. Maybe we need to understand other people better. Maybe we're all living in bubbles. Let's read Hillbilly Elegy. And, we read Hillbilly Elegy and that was frustrating for a lot of different reasons that I'm happy to elaborate on. But when it came time to go and have the 2024 election, at that point, I was on the other side. I was the teacher in the classroom. And, I had lived through this pandemic as a mom with 2 little kids, a middle school teacher who was trying to teach from home during the pandemic with like our baby in the background and like our dog while I was also trying to work. And I looked at my students the day after the election this past fall and I said, we have failed you. We have absolutely failed a generation of young people. And I decided I couldn't sit behind the desk anymore and I needed to try to make a difference. And so I'm running for Congress because I am furious about the state of the world. I am concerned about the future of my kids and my students. And I think there's a lot of people who feel the same way.
So I want to grab something near the end of and it's an interesting walk through. I'm 51 and that 15-year difference, that moment you described,
Yeah.
the way you described it, starting in the late 90s with Clinton Lewinsky, that 2000 election, September 11th, the lead up to war in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We look back at that like this 10 or 20-year window. That all occurs in less than 5 years as a practical matter. That's a tremendous amount at a key moment in your life in terms of the timing. And now you're talking to the students who this is the formative moment. What has happened? What what are the factors in our country that have led to Donald Trump not only getting back into office, but doing so with something with a stronger political position than he had when he left in 2020? What helps explain this situation where I was shocked as well, but it is real
there's an awful lot of Americans who are seeing the world very differently than the way you or I suspect some of our viewers are. What's going on, you think? What's causing this?
Yeah, I mean, that is like the question, right? If I had the answer, I'd be running for president, not for
I guess
Congress.
so, right.
But I think that, one of the things that I told my students on the day after this past election is, that I wasn't surprised this time. I think there's a lot of people who are looking for help in this moment. There's a lot of people who are struggling right now. In Hampton, where I serve on the select board, we had our property revaluation this past year. A lot of communities in New Hampshire had this. And, we have a federal government that doesn't pay its fair share. We have a state government that doesn't pay its fair share. And that buck gets passed to local communities. And for weeks and weeks around the time of the election, we had people coming in and saying, hey, I have lived here my entire life. I am on a fixed income. I am retired and I can no longer afford to pay these taxes. You cannot just keep raising our taxes and expect us to be able to pay this money. Like, we need another solution to this. And I think for a lot of people, going back to Trump was a solution because they didn't feel like, the Democrats were necessarily meeting their needs or listening to them. And I think that, we really do need political leaders who are present in our communities, who understand the suffering and the struggles that our neighbors and our families are facing, and really prioritize addressing those things legislatively.
So let's take it from the congressional. Although your local elected official status may color this, what are the top picket 2, 3 issues that the voters who are currently deciding elections right now, which the data
Yeah.
seem to suggest generally just kind of lower engagement, not low information in life, but maybe lower political information, lower political engagement. They seem to have moved towards Republicans and Trump, at least for now. A generation ago, they were much more likely to be defaulting to Democrats. Um, what do we do to connect with them? What do you think are some of the issues that we're going to need to earn their trust in order to earn their vote?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of issues. And I think like some of the things that you've identified are the things that are, true for most people here. So housing in the state of New Hampshire, right? We have young people who are graduating from UNH, the highest student loan debt in the country. Our graduates are saddled with that. And they can't find jobs that pay them enough money to find a place to live in the state of New Hampshire, right? We can't have more young families moving in here because there's not enough housing. And the housing we have is too expensive. Like, if you're in New Hampshire right now, you have to work 127 hours a week if you're getting a minimum wage, if you have a minimum wage job, to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. 127 hours a week. Who has 127 hours to work for 725 to afford like a 1-bedroom place? Like, that's absurd. Um, and so I think that like the housing issue is a real one. I think public education is another real one. We have this voucher program now at the state level that Donald Trump is looking and saying, ooh, how can we nationalize what New Hampshire is doing? That's taking public money and giving it to people who already have their kids enrolled in private schools, and that is coming at a cost to our public school students. And we also have the situation with the property taxes. And these are places where we can have better policy that helps the people who live here and makes it possible for other people to afford to live here too.
It's
So,
funny. I see Kate Poole
yeah,
in Wolfboro, who an awesome activist, and
yeah,
we were just in Wolfboro last week for an event, and she said, "Hey, what are the solutions?" Yeah, I think I think you're right on it in terms of what folks are talking about. And in that event in Wolfboro, Kate and others were like, "I think they're looking for leadership to call it out, as you are, and then they're like, we're open to solutions. Some of them federal, some of them state." Probably more than
yep.
federal. Some of them maybe local more than state in some cases. Where do you think, like, on housing? Let's take housing. That that mix, the local, state, federal. Where's the role? Maybe as somebody wants to be in Congress, how could the federal government help on housing on what is often seen as certainly a local, maybe state issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's going to be a combination of people working at the local level, at the state level, and the federal level all together that are going to be the things that fix this. So, in the state of New Hampshire, we've been having a lot of conversations locally and at the state level about zoning, right? And how we can change zoning regulations to encourage more housing. We've talked about investment in, different housing development grants. We've talked about, renter insurance and making it so that, people who are renters have a lot more protections. We've talked about addressing homelessness. We've talked about increasing the supply of affordable housing. And these things feel big, but they're actually all things that we can accomplish. And they're things that there are already people in Congress who are introducing legislation to support. The challenge is that we need to have different people in office right now because Democrats just don't have enough power to enact these types of changes, right? And when the Democrats do have power, we need to make sure that they use those levers to make life better for working people.
It certainly seems like one thing that, and I'm not complaining. In some ways, I'm oddly admiring of the GOP's willingness at both the state and federal level to take at times the thinnest of majorities and treat them like mandates. I mean, President Trump is the king of uh, losing the popular vote and saying, I have a mandate, the first time around, and this time acting like he was Ronald Reagan 1984 or something. And they are moving with great velocity on these issues, including this bill that's being debated as we speak. I guess they're bringing it back to the House to try to get the votes for the Senate version. And so now, okay, it's a year and a half from now. Donald Trump will still be president, hopefully with a Democratic majority at least in the House. So if you were there now, give me your evaluation about how Democrats have handled the situation with this big, beautiful bill. What makes it so not beautiful? And how should we be communicating to the voters between now and 2026 about why this is such a painful bill if it becomes law?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to make it very clear, like what this bill does, this big, bad bill. It takes away healthcare from millions of middle class and poor families, kids, people with disabilities. And it does so to pay for tax cuts on really, really rich people. And it actually doesn't even create enough money to pay for those tax cuts. So it just adds to our national debt, which is not a good thing right now, right? Anyone who's borrowing money or looking to borrow money realizes that when interest rates are high, that's not a good time to be borrowing money. And so the fact that our government is doing this puts us in a really bad position, right? And it basically goes back to that story I was telling at the beginning, which is it kicks the can down the road. And it's going to mean that me and my kids and their kids are going to have to pay for this ridiculous tax cut that we're giving to the wealthiest people in the world.
It is remarkable the amount of money that we're going to be borrowing for this. And the thing that I think I challenge any Republican, whether an elected official or an activist who supports this bill, for what end? Like in the past, I worked for a federal budget hawk agency out of school, and we were generally working to reduce budget deficits. But there were two exceptions that even the biggest deficit hawk would acknowledge was a good time to borrow money: a time of war, or to stimulate growth out of a recession. And there are many times in the history of our country where we've done either of those things successfully. But of course, right now, these are not applicable, and yet we're going to go another 3 to 4 trillion in debt if this bill becomes law. And we're not at war, not in the traditional sense, certainly. And according to Donald Trump, the economy is rocking and rolling. So this is going to be left at those students' bank accounts, and it seems like it will make it more expensive to borrow money at a time when Trump is begging the Fed to lower interest rates. This would seem to be the opposite. If you want the Fed to lower interest rates, the worst thing you could do is create instability and borrow $4 trillion more.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why the Republicans are even dragging their feet to get this thing across the finish line right now. And it's because they know how harmful it's going to be. I don't know if anyone saw the piece or if you read the piece, Steve, that Amanda Goki put into the Boston Globe over the weekend. It was about how this bill hurts New Hampshire in particular.
Yes.
And it's really staggering when you think about just the impact that it's going to have on our state and the people who live here alone. She outlined a couple of different reasons. One of them was SNAP, so food assistance, right? We have 77,000 people in New Hampshire who rely on food assistance, like SNAP, in order to, put food on the table. And 15,000 of them are going to lose the ability to do that when this legislation goes through. That's 15,000 of like your friends and your neighbors and maybe even you and your family who are not going to be able to put that food on the table. And that's a real problem because I don't want to live in a society where my neighbors and my friends are not able to feed their families. That's a problem. It also cuts Medicaid. So we have in New Hampshire 185,000 people who rely on Medicaid. And this bill is going to make it so that 46,000 of them are going to lose their coverage. 46,000 Granite Staters are going to lose access to healthcare. And this means they're not going to get they're not going to get the care that they need before things get bad. And it's not going to save us any money. It's just harming people, right, in a way that is so unnecessary. Our government shouldn't be in the business of harming people, right? It also makes it so that Planned Parenthood can't accept Medicaid. And Planned Parenthood treats like 10,000 New Hampshire people every single year. And that's 1 in 5 of them uses Medicaid to pay for things like cancer screenings. And so now they're not going to have access to that healthcare, right? It cuts our energy, our solar energy and our clean energy. It cuts the subsidies for electric vehicles. That's going to make your electric bill and my electric bill go up. This is bad legislation. It is bad policy. And unfortunately, in New Hampshire, we're used to that because we also have a state house that's passing bad policy at the same time. Chris Munn did a little presentation for the Hampton Democrats on Tuesday night at our monthly meeting. And he was like, you know what the big bad bill does? It makes AOT's awful appropriations even worse. Right? We have a federal government and a state government that are harming people and not working to help them. And that is not what the government should be doing.
It's the Medicaid element, in some of the work that I do at presentations, the uh, Democrats are in a deficit on a number of important issues in terms of a trust deficit relative to Republicans.
Yeah.
It's not intractable. It doesn't have to be that way in 26 or 28. But at the moment, on a lot of economic issues and national security and border immigration issues, there's a bit of a trust deficit we have to handle. One issue that is a top 5 issue to voters, where we have the trust advantage right now, is healthcare. And on both the state and federal, this double whammy of the state policy you just laid out, the federal implications that you've also just laid out of Medicaid in particular. I remind folks, if you look, I was looking online across the state, certainly CD1, this is true. I mean, some of the communities I live in CD1 obviously as well, in our district where 30 to 40% of households currently are enrolled in Medicaid.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's enormous numbers. Even in the wealthiest communities, people look at a place like Portsmouth and they go, oh, well, that's that. But even in a place like Portsmouth, it's double-digit percentage. It's 1 out of 8 households in some of the wealthiest communities in the state are accessing Medicaid right now. And here's what I remind folks. If you go, hey, I'm not on Medicaid, my family's all right, we got good insurance, it's all good. First of all, it's all good today. It is through luck and a lot of circumstances that it's not you or somebody you love tomorrow. But the other part is when people are dropped on Medicaid, they don't go, you said it, they don't do the preventative care. They show up they wait until it's an ER level situation. It becomes uncompensated care. The hospitals don't get compensated for it. That eventually gets paid in the form, basically, of higher Medicaid care spending and higher insurance rates for the rest of us that are fortunate enough to have solid private sector insurance. We end up paying for the lack of Medicaid. So when the government says, I'm going to save money by cutting Medicaid, what they're really doing is shifting the money to the rest of us in the form of basically a tax of a sort of higher insurance rates. And we're increasing the suffering of people that generally are in the toughest spot to begin with.
Yeah.
It is all of us. And I think Democrats have a real, not just an opportunity, but an obligation to just hammer that point, especially if this bill becomes law, which it certainly seems like that's where we're heading. I don't think Donald Trump's going to take no for an answer. And today's Republican Party seems to, bend the knee when push comes to shove, even if they know it's bad for their 2026, personal reelection chances.
Yeah. And it's the same thing here in the state of New Hampshire, right? These issues are all connected because we are all connected. And it's just an absolute disgrace that our own Congressional Budget Office said that this bill is going to make the poorest Americans poorer and the richest Americans richer. And that's still something that's passing our House of Representatives. How is that representative of the people in this country? That is not what I want to see in this country. And I'm going to absolutely fight, tooth and nail against it because it's unacceptable. We also need to stop the stigmatization of people who are on Medicaid. Everyone deserves healthcare. Everyone should have access to doctors and the medication they need in order to be healthy. And the fact that our healthcare is tied to our employment is a holdover from World War II when the federal government instituted wage freezes. And so corporations, in order to get around that, gave, their employees, who are mostly men at that time, healthcare in order to, incentivize them to keep working. And that's still the way that we do this today. We had an opportunity during the pandemic to fix this, and we're going to have another one after this piece of legislation goes through, because it's an absolute disgrace that we're living in a country that's taking away healthcare from poor kids, middle-class people, and people with disabilities.
I mean, the concept that we're also used to as Americans, that most working age Americans get their insurance through their employer as this normal thing. As you say, it is a byproduct of a vastly different time. And
Yeah.
I would argue if Democrats would want to, we could own the mantle of the party of entrepreneurship. We could own the of new business formation, which is where most new jobs get created. The number one barrier when you talk to somebody who's thinking about doing that really scary but exciting and necessary thing of starting your own business, the biggest barrier for most of them is the uncertainty that comes with the loss of their private sector provided insurance.
Yeah.
It's stunting that entrepreneurial growth that we know leads to job creation. It's funny. Republicans have owned the brand for most of my lifetime of the party of entrepreneurship. And it's the most anti-entrepreneur policy, perhaps, that we have in this country. And I think that that's an opportunity for us in this broader discussion of healthcare, which I think has a chance to be a dominant issue for the next, 17 months or whatever. We can be for things, and it's not just we're for preventing people from getting to the ER before they get the help they need. We're for entrepreneurship, and it's the same policy we're talking about. So I think that there's real opportunity that can come from what is going to be an almost tragic, bill signing here in the next couple of days. So
Yeah.
So now, how long have you been an announced candidate in this race? About
I have been an announced candidate for tomorrow. It will be 1 month on the 4th of July. So,
okay, all right.
yeah.
So it's only been a month, but compare how it has been to what you anticipated. The day before you announced. How's the first month been going?
I have loved it a lot more than I thought I would. I was thinking, gosh, it's going to be a lot of hard work. And that is absolutely the case. But one of the things that I've been most excited about is just how excited people are about the idea of a politician coming to places in Seabrook where a lot of politicians don't go.
Yep.
And instead of being here's what I'm going to do, here's what you guys are doing wrong, here's why we've been messing up in the past, asking questions. So one of the things that I've been introducing, I'm calling district dialogues. And, as someone who has a background in facilitating and teaching, I think this is the kind of thing that I wish more of our representatives did. So I'm trying it out. And what I do is I go into communities and get a group of people together. So in one example, we went up to Gilmanton and had a meeting with the Tri-Town Dems.
Yeah.
And rather than just talking at people, I asked them, what do you wish politicians understood better about your experience?
That is a great question. You would think that's a no-brainer.
You would think, Steve. And yet, in all the time that I have been, in New Hampshire as a voter, an adult, no politician has ever asked me my opinion on politics or asked me what I want to see done differently. And so I do think that it's a pretty simple and obvious thing to those of us who have been on the other end. And flipping it really is, I think, what we need right now. Like, I'm running a grassroots campaign because I think there's a lot of people, people like me who aren't represented right now and aren't as well represented as they could and deserve to be. And I do think that those voices really matter because they tell us things about our communities that we might otherwise not know. So, Steve, you're a constituent of mine. Like, what is something you wish that politicians understood better?
I think that on this bill, I don't want to sound like a broken record. The impact on all of us on our health care and our health insurance, I think, is vastly misunderstood or just not really focused on at all. And I'm afraid that um and it's not easy, right? It's a complicated issue. So I understand that part, but it affects all of us, and including a lot of folks who I think voted for Donald Trump because they thought he would make their life better. And I think understanding how this healthcare system is going to work in this new regime with the new law and understanding other people's perspectives on it better, that's something I would love to dig a lot more on. And I want my members of the federal delegation to be really sophisticated on that too, so that they can help lead on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that our federal delegation needs to be out in front. And I think it's so important because, we see 9 out of 10 Democrats in New Hampshire do not support this bill, right? The majority of New Hampshire citizens do not support this bill. If you go and ask people in Hampton Beach on the 4th of July, do you support this bill? Out of every 10 people you talk to, only 3 are going to say yes. And the fact that that is still passing is a problem. Right. And so I think that we need, not only politicians who are going out and listening, but politicians who are going out and leading, right? Leading from the front on these issues that we all care so much about in the state of New Hampshire.
So here's a question, and it's a good question that gets, it's a little bit of a strategic, tactical campaign question, but this is an exciting race. I mean, we now have 4 announced candidates, a 5th who is exploring, and others who, by the end of this, I think I'll be the only resident of the congressional district who's not running for office. So, which is great. I'd much rather cheer all of you on. The question really is getting votes from independents, or I might refine it a little, that undeclared voter in New Hampshire who, in a lot of cases, may have voted Democrat in the past and maybe is disenchanted and maybe they gave Donald Trump a try. It's somebody who's up for grabs. And again, probably not a super duper high information voter. Maybe they're less likely to go to one of the district dialogues because they're not terribly political. So that's not their vibe. That's not their bag. But they're really important voters. How do you, as specifically, or we as Democrats, how do we connect with folks that are probably going to vote, but not terribly political for 23 and a half of the 24 months every 2 years?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, who has time to be following everything that's going on right now? If you're working multiple jobs like me and my husband, you're probably not going to, or you have kids or aging parents, right?
Yeah.
You don't have all day to sit and read the news or follow what's going on. And you don't necessarily want your kids watching that all day because it's really depressing and overwhelming. And so I think one of the things that I want to do is just meet people where they're at. I am an elected official in Hampton. It's a nonpartisan role that I'm in. And I was elected by a coalition of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And when I make decisions around the select board table, I make them with Democrats, Republicans, and independents in mind. Like, I am not going to Congress just to represent the Democrats in this district. I'm going to represent all of my friends and neighbors and the people who live here because they all deserve someone who's going to fight for them and fight for us. And so I think in terms of independence, like, you have to go where the people are. And wherever that is, I will be there and I'll be happy to sit and talk and disagree. But I'll always listen and I'll always show up. And I'm not going to avoid the conversations that are hard just because they're hard.
And I do think that being accessible is the lion's share towards earning the support of somebody who's not a super duper partisan, but also not super duper political. Just being available. One of the things I learned early from being an operative it was remarkable how much voters, for example, noticed a phone number and an email address being on a piece of mail saying, contact contact my campaign. And then I would follow up and say, how many calls did you get? How many emails from this did you get? And it would be countable on one hand because most folks didn't actually have a question today. They just want to know that if they ever did have a question, they could. And I think being accessible is such a big part of connecting with this group. I realized in some of the time we've got left, let's take a step back because I think a lot of folks, both that are watching today and that'll watch in the recording that we'll have, may not know a lot about your professional background. You've alluded to your local elected office, things like that. So on that level, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about who you are? Give them the bio a little bit.
Love it. All right. So I'm Carleigh Beriont. I am a mom. I have two amazing little kids. And I'm married to a public school teacher. He's a middle school teacher, so doing God's work. I am also a historian by training and someone who has studied religion and U.S. history and public policy for my entire adult life and also taught about it. I'm someone who got my start as a high school civics teacher and loves every minute of being in the classroom with students and who sees this campaign as an opportunity to really change the type of leadership that we have, but also an opportunity to educate people and inspire people and bring hope back to people who feel like politicians don't care about them, who feel like politicians don't listen to them, and who feel like politicians don't lead in the way that they want to see. And so, those are some of the reasons that I'm running. Those are some of the things that I wish people knew about me. I have two dogs. One has 3 legs and she's a delight. And, I'm a regular person who, goes to Market Basket and who worries when the doctor says, hey, we're not going to cover that strep test. And your kid can't go to daycare for the next 48 hours about who's going to watch them. I don't have parents who are nearby who can watch my kids for me. So my husband and I draw straws and decide who's going to take the day off. I'm someone who, worries about the lights that are all on in my car right now, but hasn't taken it to the shop because I'm worried it's going to cost a lot of money to fix it. And I don't want to deal with that right now because I don't have a lot of money to fix it right now. I'm somebody who knows how much money it costs to do your laundry in the laundromat on Route 1 in Hampton. It's $8.50, and that's more than our federal and state minimum wage because I've been there. I'm someone who loves knocking doors for other candidates and holding signs for the 13 hours outside the polling place to get that special recognition you get for being so hardcore. And I'm someone who loves local elections and who really loves the Granite State and wants things to be better for the people who live here. Because we deserve so much
Hampton.
better.
Hampton is a really interesting microcosm, I would argue, of the first congressional district in that even though it's on the seacoast, and I think a lot of folks that don't live out here think of it as it's all like Portsmouth, which is this white blue, D+20 kind of D+ whatever, and certainly there's pockets of that, but Hampton is about as purple, and I spent a lot of time on the data on this. It is about as purple. It's about as dead zero as any town in the entire state of New Hampshire. It is a very tight microcosm of how the state overall is voting. It's moving slowly in a Democratic direction. One of the best local Democratic committees in the state can be found in Hampton. Awesome organization there. But I have to think that being a local elected official in what is kind of a barometer type town in the state probably helps a little bit as you look at a congressional district that is also one of the 20 or 25 most purple congressional districts in America. It's got to help a little bit there.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it, Steve, but I'll say it again. I think that Hampton is an excellent bellwether for the congressional district. And I think that if you can win in Hampton, you can win this race and you can be a great leader for the entire district. When I won my race in Hampton, I unseated a longtime Republican. And I also work very closely with Republicans around that table every other Monday night in order to make sure that we make sustainable investments in our community, right? That we have garbage trucks that show up on time, that we have public safety and infrastructure that we need in order for people to live their lives here. And we also try to do that in a way that doesn't, drive up people's taxes, because I get it. I pay the taxes too. And I look at my bill and my mouth hangs open. And I think, wow, if only the federal government paid its fair share for things like, IDEA, which is Students with Disabilities Education, which is one of the number one costs for our public school systems. Or if only the state of New Hampshire would identify more sources of revenue rather than taking them off the table. It's really hard when you feel like the quote unquote adults in the room are not doing their job. And so, that's one of the things that I think in Hampton we do really well, and why I would be a great representative for the district.
Yeah, it's a great town, and it's the other towns. I live in Northampton. I'm a few miles away from you, and it's another one of these towns that used to be pretty red and is now
Mm.
really purple. And it's this combination of obviously folks moving into the community, but it's also what we used to call as a lifetime or a political New Hampshire guy, what we used to call Walter Peterson Republican, which now we would not call a Republican. We'd probably call them a moderate Democrat. But it was somebody who was a Yankee Republican who was fiscally responsible, but not kind of reflexively anti-government. Period. End of sentence. You can believe, you can be a
Yeah.
Democrat who believes in math, and I think that's a lot of what we used to call Peterson, after former Governor Walter Peterson, a Peterson Republican. And I think there's a lot of those folks in towns like Hampton, Northampton, who, as long as we present a level of kind of competence, empathy, professionalism, strong listening skills, which you've alluded to several times here, this combination can be very attractive to the kind of person who, they weren't just voting for liberal Republicans or something. These are folks that were voting for Mitt Romney in 2012 and have become very uncomfortable with where the Republican Party has moved. That's a segment in New Hampshire that's pretty significant. And I think the Seacoast has a lot of them, and probably you had to get some of them to vote for you in order to get where you are in Hampton today. There's a lot of them there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And I think there's a lot of people who are just so burned out by our labels, or like the, ideology of the parties, feeling like that's leading, to anybody, regardless of your party. I say, if you believe in, a higher minimum wage, you believe that people should have health care, you believe that the government shouldn't be making poor people poorer, right? Or taking away rights for people, come on down and vote for me, right? This is the Democratic Party that I stand for. This is the Democratic Party that I see in Hampton doing so well. And this is what I want to see the Democratic Party doing at the state and federal levels. The Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the United States. And it has not always been in the right. During the 1900s or the 1800s, the political party that was the Democrats was the political party that supported slavery. Like, that is not, the legacy that we had to be proud of. But they figured it out and they said, hey, we need to reinvent ourselves. This cannot be the Democratic Party. And, in the 19th century, they changed their tune and they started supporting abolition. And in the 20th century, they started supporting workers and immigrants. And that's where we are today. We're at a moment where Democrats can say, hey, this is what we stand for. We stand for hardworking Americans. We stand for people who care about the future of this country, who care about public education and public safety and our environment. And this is the country we want to live in. And so this is the country we're going to work day in and day out to create, because this is what we deserve as a people who live in the United States.
So that's a good segue in the few minutes that we have left. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 4 announced candidates, all good folks. And like I said, others probably in the wings. So this is going to get bigger before it settles in. And I think it's pretty wide open. And of course, it's many months from now, right? They were talking about moving the state primary up to as early as next June. But if I understand it correctly, they've decided to hold off on the new law until 2028. So congrats on that. You got all next summer to do this too now, it turns out. You got
another
next
4th of July. Yeah, I can't wait.
So how do you see the race shaping up in terms of, I don't want to sound too, pundity, but the lanes where do you see your differential from the announced and maybe other candidates? What are you uniquely bringing to the table? How do you carve out a lane that can get that plurality of the vote? Because it probably won't take a majority, not with this size field. What will get the plurality of the vote that gets, Carleigh to the finish line?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I want to go back to and emphasize there is the fact that I'm the only one serving in elected office in the state of New Hampshire. I am the only one who has ever unseated a Republican.
Yeah.
And I welcome anybody, regardless of what lane they see themselves in, to join me and to fight for working families. My plan is to go and to meet everyone in every single one of our 75 municipalities and to sit and to listen and to have a conversation about what they want this country to be. Because I really do believe that that's what we need as a democracy right now. We need everyone to stand together and create a future that we can believe in, right? The future that we deserve. So in terms of lanes, I know there's lots of different people, and I think it's great. Everyone deserves a choice. I think, the more the merrier in some ways. This is New Hampshire. We have a very vibrant political culture, and I think it's awesome. And I'm excited and inspired by all the people who are throwing their hat in the race, because it's not easy to run for Congress, especially when you are working and you have multiple kids and not a lot of family nearby. But I also really believe that my kids deserve a better future, and I'm going to work to create it for them as a candidate for Congress.
I have to say, it is exciting. And one of the things I love about politics is it's got to be one of the only walks of life where, as a 51-year-old, folks still think I'm young. Because let's be honest, a lot of our activists, and this is true for both parties, tend to be a little older than 51. And until recently, it felt like a lot of our candidates were a lot older than, say, 51. But I look at this field as it's shaping up.
Yeah.
And we're talking about folks that are likely a field that's going to range from folks in their 20s through their early 50s, folks that have a variety of life experiences. One thing that is interesting is we don't really, I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but we don't really have a Manchester-centric candidate either running, traditional like Chris Pappas, back in 2006 when Carol Shea Porter won, Jim Craig, who's about as manch as you're going to get, a great guy. He was the minority leader of the Democratic Party at that time, and he ran. And usually we have a traditional, obvious, very manch-centric candidate. And neither any of the announced candidates nor any of the folks who are rumored really could claim that mantle, which I find so exciting because it means it's wide open. I mean, the power of the Democratic Party's politics have slid to the seacoast this century. The activism, the population, the registration, the donors, the candidates, the talent. It's been sliding steadily towards the coast. You're a good example of it. Morris Sullivan's in Newcastle. Stephanie Shaheen's in Portsmouth. I think Christian Urrutia, he's the fourth candidate who just got in, and he's up in, he's from, I think he's from
Moultonborough.
Yeah, and he lives up there in Carroll County in Moultonborough. And so it's going to be fascinating, I think, so much opportunity for all of you to make inroads, build relationships in Manchester, which is kind of its own political world in a lot of ways. I'm a native of Manchester. And the suburbs there, right? Goffstown, Bedford, Merrimack. These are very, by New Hampshire standards, big suburban towns that are also some of the ones that are the most purple. They used to be really red, and they're becoming super purple, even light blue, and which means lots of primary voters compared to 20 years ago. So it's this really dynamic field, a lot of talent, and a dynamic electorate, I think, with wide open swaths. And I think it's going to come down to how you present the work, and I have no doubt that you'll be hustling. That you will meet the threshold of hustle to
Absolutely.
get out there. So let's. How can folks learn more about you, either digitally, upcoming, however you want to? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I think to your plea for the Manchester people, hey, Manchester people, if you're looking for a candidate, come find me. My name is Carleigh Beriont, and I'm happy to represent you. I was in Manchester for Pride over the weekend, and a number of people that I talked to there said, you're here, you're in Manchester for Pride, like that's exciting. I want to vote for you. You came to us and you're meeting us where we're at. And I think that's what I want to see candidates doing. And so for anyone in Manchester who's looking for your candidate, come on, find me. You can find me on my website. It's Carleigh Beriont, Carleigh.com. And to your point, Steve, about Manchester and like the provincialism in our candidates historically in New Hampshire, I would say that I think that there's like kind of a flattening in the district. So we all experience these issues like in our different ways based on, who serves in local government in our communities. But I do think that like we've agreed that housing and healthcare and minimum wage, these are issues across the state and across the district. And so I think we need to really be able to meet the needs and to address the needs of people wherever they're living if we're going to be successful. And so that's what I'm trying to do. On my website, there's an issues page that has a map that's kind of dynamic. And so it shows where I've been and also highlights the stories of people in different places and what they're struggling with right now. So if you're in Merrimack and you're worried about PFAS in your water, we're here for you. If you're in Hampton and you're worried about scammers taking money from elderly people, which has actually become a huge problem in the Seacoast, and it's what our police department spends over 50% of its time addressing, we have a story about that. And so I would encourage people to see, where they are already featured on my map and encourage them to meet me and follow me over the next couple of months as I run for Congress.
Well, it's a great point. And that flattening out you're describing, the limited in-state polling that we have, there's so much more federal polling typically.
Yeah.
It really confirms that some of the regional differences, and there are some, like you mentioned, PFAS, right? In certain communities, it's spiked even higher, though unfortunately that seems to be spreading as more communities have turning out being affected. But oddly, the combination of several of you being from one similar region, the Seacoast, combined with nobody being obviously, say born and bred from the western part of the district, means that it really comes down to differences between the candidates. It comes down to being there. It comes down. What I hope as a Democrat is it gives a chance for a little bit more of a meritocratic process that folks can, in places like Goffstown and Bedford that have outstanding local committees, that really sharp people, strong leadership skills. When they bring a candidate to town, people show up. And when they like somebody, they volunteer. I've seen it in my own running for office experience. Some of the best volunteers, they get it. And so it's not just introducing yourself. It's when you earn that support. I find in these, particularly these suburbs around Manchester, you get so much more than their vote, right? You get their support in ways that even if nobody's from Bedford or Goffstown or whatever, it's going to help build that infrastructure in these communities because, it's a small state until you get in your car, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, man, there's a lot of people to talk to, and which is a daunting but also exciting. So I think that everybody's going to have a chance to make a case that isn't always the case when you have folks that kind of own a region of the state and they kind of begin with that, and everybody's trying to fight against that just to get their voice heard. I don't think that's going to be quite the case this time, which I think is excellent. Let's see. Okay, so tomorrow, if people are going to the Merrimack parade, you will be in that parade.
Yep.
All right.
I'll be in it with my 2015 Subaru.
Excellent. We are a two Subaru household. So that's a great parade. And then in the morning, those of us on the Seacoast, if you've never been to a naturalization ceremony, cannot overstate how awesome, inspiring, how patriotic it is. Manchester is such an immigrant-driven community, always has been. Like my folks are immigrants. They settled in Manchester. And even though, the language is no longer French and it's Spanish, and then it moves on and it's different dialects, but it's the same story, just getting reborn for centuries now. And it's amazing. And so if you're on the Seacoast and you haven't done that, it's at Strawberry Bank, correct?
Yes, it's at Strawberry Bank. The public is invited.
Yes.
The parking is a challenge, but I encourage everyone to come, and if not to this one, to another naturalization ceremony, because it really is something that is inspiring and encouraging, and it's an opportunity for us all to come together and reflect on, who we are as a country and who we can be, and that's an opportunity that we should never pass up.
So that'll be great. And you get a chance to meet Carleigh. You can look for her there. There'll be a lot of people there, especially if folks, listen. And but take the time, and it'll be worth the troubles, even the parking. Anyway, Carleigh, thanks so
Absolutely.
much for taking time. I really appreciate it. I hope folks go to carleighberiont.com and learn more. And we will see you on the trail soon. I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you to all of those local Democratic committees, the people who do spend hours and hours making it so that other Democrats can run and win in these elections. Thank you for all the work that you do, giving us this opportunity. I mean, New Hampshire and the United States wouldn't be what they are without all of you guys, and you just do amazing work. And so I want to shine a light on all of them, the volunteers and the local committees, for really holding down the fort.
Amen to that. All right, thanks. Happy 4th
Thanks,
to you.
Steve.
It will be a busy 4th. We will
That's
see
right.
you
Have
soon.
a happy and safe 4th of July.
All right. Thanks all for listening, either live or on the recorded. You can hear this at the Steve Marchand podcast on iTunes, on Spotify,
Shayna.
on our YouTube channel, and we'll spread the gospel there too. All right. Thanks, everybody. Happy 4th to you all.